Hi guys, welcome back to the Car Compulsion YouTube channel. Slightly different flavour in this video today. I'm going to be talking a little bit around sort of PCPs, car deals, negative equity, and how those things have kind of been impactful in the journey that I've had over the last sort of 3 years. And actually, very embarrassingly, I've had 12 cars over the past 3 years. I've been changing cars like people change their clothes, and it's been a really silly situation. I've been nitpicking holes in the hot hatches and things that I've had. Nothing has been giving me the feeling that I wanted, and it certainly wouldn't advocate going out and spending loads of money to change out of cars. I'm not infinitely wealthy, and unfortunately, like most YouTubers, I can't have another car every other week for the sake of it. So I had to figure out very quickly some very generic ways to help me minimize this impact of negative equity, and also getting better deals on the cars that I was obviously wanting to buy. And that's what this video is about today. I'm not in any position to give you financial advice or encourage you to go out and spend money. I'm just giving you a brief overview that if you are in a position where you own a car and you have some negative equity in that car, there are some very, very generic things that you can do to maximize your chances of getting a better part exchange value for that car. And that's what I want to talk about today. And we're going to start just by giving a very brief explanation around exactly what negative equity is for the people that don't know. Now, negative equity is a term that basically means that you are a bit upside down in the car that you have. It means that there is some outstanding money there that's going to need to be settled one way or the other. If you take out a car on a PCP or a finance agreement of some description, whether that be your standard hire purchase, some form of lease plan, or whatever you decide to take out, if you end that plan early, and sometimes even if you don't, you are likely going to be faced with a situation where there is an amount of negative equity there. Now, to give it to you in a broken down sense, if you take out a finance agreement for 4 years and you decide after 2 years, or in my case 2 days, that you want to sell the car, you will then take it to a dealership, go to get it valued online. You may choose to sell it privately, which can be a little bit tricky with finance, but it's doable. And ultimately, whatever that place, person, brand, dealership is willing to offer you is going to likely differ from what the finance company are going to expect you to pay to get out of your agreement. Very simply put, if you go down to a dealership and they offer you $25,000 for your car as valuation, and that's the most they're going to pay, and your finance company wants $28,000, once they've calculated your interest rebate, etc., that's due, that £3,000 in between is what's classed as negative equity, and one way or the other, you're going to need to pay that. So let's set in motion the story of why I'm making this video today and why I felt it was interesting. I get a lot of questions on all the cars I've had and how I've got out of them. My first car was a red Seat Ibiza 1.2 TSI. Brilliant little car. Bought it about a week after passing my test. And it was I was paying like 190 quid a month for it or something. It was a great little car. And after about 18 months, I actually got to drive in, or got a passenger ride in, a Leon Cupra. And that set in motion a chain of events that led to me becoming very, very interested in driving higher performance cars. Much to the displeasure of my wife, cars are now banned talk when she's around because of all the cars that I've had. And my initial interactions with early dealers, when I didn't understand about getting, in a position of power, knowledge, understanding what I was talking about, I ended up having to pay some quite considerable sums to get out the cars. And I'd go down to the dealers and they'd always end in one way. As soon as I brought up the negative equity situation, it became like a dark ominous cloud. As soon as they knew I wasn't just wanting to lump down 4K on a deal and had no aggro, it became more of a complicated process. And they'd go off, once they'd had all my Part X details, to their office to speak to the business manager to get me the best deal that they could. And ultimately, it would always end in one of two ways. The guy would come back out of the office after doing the deal and he'd look like he'd just been asked to walk the Green Mile. His head went down, he'd walk towards me like this, and ultimately I knew that bad news was coming. He really looked like he wanted to walk directly past me, get in his car and go home for the day, because he was just embarrassed about giving me the figure they were about to. And it always ended up with me feeling a bit like this. And then there's the other guy that would come bounding out of the office with a real $1 million look on his face. He's looking at me like a walking pound sign. I'm feeling positive. I'm getting positive vibes. He sits down and he slaps me with the most awful part exchange figure I've ever had. And I sit there and I think to myself, you have blatantly just lubed me up for that, put a cherry on top, but it felt like I'd been slapped round the face with a disgusting great big wet fish, and I left feeling very, very negative. And I decided there must be a better way to be able to get out of these situations and put myself in a more favourable position, and that's how these tips have worked with me. And out of all the 11 cars that I've had, every single one of them bar one has had a negative equity situation. My tip number one is in relation to knowledge and research. Knowledge is power, and actually never has a truer word been spoken when buying or selling a car. I never used to go armed in the early days of buying cars with enough knowledge of one, what deals were available in the market on the car I wanted to buy, and two, what Part X valuation was looking like for my car in the market. Now I would always do a little bit of research, but now if I'm going to buy another car, I'll go armed with an Auto Trader valuation in the back of my mind, a We Buy Any Car evaluation as a last resort. I'll go on to rival businesses and brands, online valuation tools, even make phone calls to other dealers to get a flavour of what they would offer me for my car. And obviously I keep all that information in the back of my mind. And if I do receive a monumentally low offer, then I can counteract the argument with some information around what the car is currently selling for in the market. And it's actually worked in my favour a number of times. The second thing I always do is make sure I'm aware market-wide of what deals are available on the car that I want to buy. If you take my M2, for example, or M cars in general, the wide variety of different deals across the M Performance range in all different dealerships across the country. And I want to make sure that I'm very, very well armed with that knowledge. Going into a dealership with really good knowledge of your Part X, your car, and just seeming like you know what you're talking about, I find sets a much, much more mature and much less sales focused discussion. And hopefully it will end up, and it has for me, ended up in a much more pleasurable experience, because they treat you like you know what you're talking about, and actually some of that sales jargon falls to the side. My second tip is don't be geographically bound by a location for the car. Yes, there may be a local dealer, and yes, you may find your dream car at the best spec locally and you can view it and drive it, etc. And that's brilliant. But 9 times out of 10 in the cars that I've bought, I've had a much better success getting a car that I want because I've been willing to travel for it. I've travelled to Manchester, Bath, Wales. I live in the southeast, so 8-hour round trips. And I understand there'd be some worry about if you get there and the car's not correct or it's got marks on it that you didn't know. But if you handle that right in the first place, every single time you collect your car, it should be exactly as you specified. I ask for a video. I specify things like, can you send me a video of every single mark it's got on it? Can you send me a video of anything I need to be concerned about? Does it have swell marks? Does it have scuff marks? And I'm very specific, and I get it in writing that the car doesn't have those things. And every time I've been there, I've actually been very, very pleased with the cars that I've picked up. But I've always found that if I am willing to ring a lot of dealerships, as you know, nationwide, especially on readily available cars like M2s, S3s, S4s, AMGs of a variety that are always available, you will get a better deal if you are willing to travel most of the time. You may get one locally and that's brilliant, but if you broaden it out, you are likely to find you get a better Part X, and you maybe even get a much better deal overall on the car. My tip number 3 is don't be afraid to push back on the offers that you have in front of you. Now that may sound like something that's pretty obvious, and if you're not happy with something, you'd push back. But even at points where I've been given the most monumentally good offer, or what I thought was a brilliant offer, or a pretty good offer on my part exchange value, don't be afraid to push back, and don't be afraid to tell the dealership that you're going to walk away from the deal if you don't get to where you want to be. Now, a lot of people that I know that are out there, probably not seasoned car buyers, don't always push back on the deal. They don't always, command, or, they're too scared to walk away from the deal with the car they really want. But every single car that I've bought, I've always pushed back, and there's always been normally a little bit extra wiggle room, whether you're trying to get that monthly payment down a little bit, or whether you're trying to squeeze an extra 500 quid, or get a little bit less negative equity to pay off. When you get to the point where you think the deal is the best it's going to be, don't be afraid to push back. Every single time I've pushed back, I've always got a little something extra. Don't give up on it, do push back. And if they're really not willing to pay ball, and you really, really can't get to the figures that they want, or it's just not sitting right with you, then tell them you'll come back to them, head out somewhere else and try and get a comparative deal, but always push back. My tip number 4 is purely related to if you have a negative equity situation. I've never found, or in the last sort of 6-7 cars that I've bought, I've never found it to be a positive experience allowing it to start, or the conversation to start around evaluation. So another thing you can try, if that doesn't work for you, is to be very direct about what you can and can't afford, and just don't waste anyone's time. My phone call will go something like this. Hello, Mr. Dealer. I have a 2020 S3. I've had it for a couple of weeks. I don't like it. I know there's going to be a negative equity situation. I understand that, and I do have some money I can put, keyword, towards that situation. You have an AMG A45 in stock that I'm really interested in. It's got everything I want on it. I want to put in £2,000 and I want to pay £400 a month for your AMG. That is all I can do. This is my settlement figure. This is my reg number. This is the condition and mileage of my car. I have £2,000 to put in towards the deal, and I want to walk out of the deal with you taking my car, clearing the finance, and putting me in the AMG for £400 a month. Now, I've done that a number of times, many times, when it hasn't quite worked out doing it the other way, and I've had really positive response. So if you do not get where you want to be by having those initial discussions, work out what you can afford, go to the dealership that has a car that you want and be honest with them about it and tell them that's what you can afford. It will open the channels for brilliant negotiation. One small part I want to add that's kind of a tip, but also a warning. Sometimes dealerships will encourage you to roll in your negative equity or roll in a proportion of the finance into a new agreement, and that isn't always the best thing to do. Actually, you could end up rolling in more money into an agreement and actually paying a higher interest rate, and it overall can actually end up costing you more. Now, there have been a couple of occasions where I have rolled in money, and that is because actually I had 2 agreements where I was paying 6.9% APR, and actually I was then able to get 2.9% APR, and I actually rolled in a little proportion of the negative equity into the new deal, because actually the overall figure that I would have been paying would actually work out less because of the lesser interest rate. So do be wary about that. Don't roll it in all the time, especially don't roll in. If you're like on a 2.9% APR BMW Financial Services and you go and buy something on a 10% APR, don't roll the negative equity into that, because you're going to be paying interest on that money as well. So just be careful around that part. So to summarise, guys, I've had a lot of cars that I've been in negative equity with, a lot of cars that I've changed very quickly, sometimes even in a matter of weeks. Silly behaviour. I've definitely paid money to get out of those cars, but I've never ever put myself in financial difficulty to do so. And I appreciate that not everyone out there can just buy themselves out of a car they don't like. And I'm not suggesting that that is something that you should, be able to do. But I went through a period of silliness where I changed a lot of cars. I won't be doing it again in the future. It is doable, and I'll end on an example. I took a PCP deal out, or a finance deal out, on a Focus ST. I was driving a Fiesta at the time, so the EcoBoost, because I was trying to be sensible, and that lasted about a month, and I got into this car, and because it was new on the market, I ended up in like what I thought was going to be like somewhere between a £6,500 to an £8,000 hole on this Focus ST. They were quite an expensive car. There was no used market for them because no one was buying. Everyone had stock in because it was newly released, and I was in absolute despair. I was gutted because I never thought I was going to be able to figure out how to get out of it. And I stood by my morals and I rung around nationwide. I was trying to get into a Civic FK8 Type R at the time. And everywhere I rung, no one was interested in touching it. And just so happens I rung a dealership in Northampton, and that dealership, I was very honest with them, and they turned around and actually were able to give me almost what I required for the Focus, because they had someone they could sell it to that they knew would buy it. I ended up having to put about 1,800 quid in as like a deposit / negative equity clearance to get into the FK8, and I actually got into it at a lower monthly payment. And it can be done, but it took me a week or two of trying on and off different places. So it can be done. Don't give up. More content coming soon on the channel, including a very nice McLaren.